All right, so that's me. If you want to know more about that, I'm here all day. I'm not going to go on about too much about me, but there you go. So what are we here to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about my story at Stack Overflow, specifically on the Stack Overflow for Enterprise team. I'm going to go over the basics of Wardley Maps, how they're constructed, how you might use them, and then maybe how you ask the right questions and communicate the answers using Wardley Maps. And then hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be walking out of here with some new knowledge you can take back and solve some real world problems at your organization. OK, so what is Stack Overflow for Enterprise? Everybody here uses Stack Overflow, I assume? OK. Kind of know what it does. It's a Q&A site for developers. Well, we also have an enterprise version where you can host, or we can host for you, your own private instance for your kind of company-wide knowledge management needs. Works the same as stackoverflow.com, so you're already well used to it. For the customers who do opt to host with us, we use Azure. And we do basically multi-tenancy through duplication. So every customer just gets their own separate infrastructure, top to bottom, from load balancer all the way down to SQL Server. And I guess a bit about the Stack Overflow SRE team. We are broken up into smaller teams. We call them V teams because you can sort of exist on any number of teams. But what it is each team is supposed to be or team lead is supposed to be the subject matter expert for their projects and sort of lead the architectural discussions and I guess play a little bit of a role of product developer for their team. I'm the team lead for the enterprise product, and that sort of means I get to do all of the things: networking, infrastructure, applications, databases, anything that really props up our enterprise product. And because enterprise is the only team using Azure, we're also sort of the de facto cloud team. And then also, we are hiring. So if you're interested in talking to me about that, see me afterwards. Stack Overflow, we just recently celebrated our 10th anniversary. Some of you might not even remember the internet before Stack Overflow. It was chaos and darkness. So that's 10 years of doing things one particular way, sort of the Stack Overflow public.com way of doing things, bare metal, very optimized for performance. And now with this enterprise product, we're trying to do things a new way. We're using Azure. We're doing things the cloud way. So we're using new tools. We're using new skills. For the first time, we're sort of taking security very seriously. Historically, like stackoverflow.com would publish their database on BitTorrent. Our enterprise customers do not appreciate that. So solving some new problems. And like I mentioned, every new customer right now, they get their own instance. So that's everything. So every time we stand up a new customer, we're increasing the size of our infrastructure. And that means lots more work, duplication of work, and more work than we have people for. So I'm guessing we're not the only ones in that situation. Too much work, not enough time. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Here's an example. Every quarter, we sit down and we try and map out. I shouldn't say map, because this was pre-map. We estimate out like our work budget for the next 3 months. We do have a project manager who not only organizes like the SRE team, but development, QA, and is trying to figure out, prioritize, just get everybody on the same page. And this is what the spreadsheet looked like after the end of our first quarterly, the end of the first quarterly planning meeting that I was the lead for the enterprise team. And you see we had 89 days available and 100 days of work scheduled. The 89 days was based on the fact that we had 2 engineers, our two engineers, me and another guy, are on call rotation. So every 4 or 5 weeks or whatever, we go on call for a week. And the Stack Overflow sort of policy for on-call is when you're on call, you focus on toil work. You're not focusing on any project work. So that's basically just a week you lose for moving forward on any of your projects. But then you're focusing on hopefully fixing issues so the next person who goes on call doesn't have to spend as much time doing it. Sometimes we pair on some of this work. So like I think 15% of the time we budgeted for both of us working on the same thing at the same time. And then obviously we go on vacation, we get sick. So that's sort of the math behind the magic number of 89. So obviously we had like 20 extra days of work scheduled that then, was probably going to be humanly possible. So the questions are, what do we do first? How do we prioritize things? What do we cut from our list? There are a lot of ways to sort of slice and dice that. I mean, there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of project management books. Plenty of opinions on how to do this. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm not even going to mention many of them because there's no time. So what we're going to do is move on and talk about this awesome idea. So like I said, I actually just joined Stack Overflow in April and started working on the enterprise team. And so my boss is setting expectations like you need to be the expert of this, you need to set the roadmap, and I'm like, I don't even understand what's going on here. So I'm trying to, sit at my desk trying to come up with ways to document like the current state of things, what the priority of projects are, and this, of course, I don't know the history of things, so I'm kind of coming in a little bit blind as well. Excuse me. And so at first, I'm sitting down and I'm trying to write this out like a typical roadmap, like heading 1, here's where we are, and here's where we need to go, and come up with the list of things we're going to do and all the quarters. And I gave up on that pretty quickly because words are hard. And writing, I think, really works a lot better when you kind of know the answer. It's not really a way to discover when you have some questions about the existence of things. At least for me, writing was not the way I was going to organize this and figure out how all these pieces fit together and what we're going to do. So I started messing around with some visualization. I was trying to make sort of like a Gartner magic quadrant of, up here we have the things, or maybe up here we have the things that are awesome, and then down here we have the things that are terrible, and splattered things around in the middle. But that doesn't really show the relationship. It's just sort of like a splatter plot. It works great for the Magic Quadrant because everybody's sort of doing the same thing. It doesn't work for this because how do you have a relationship between like a customer onboarding process and server virtualization, setup? So just, I guess, sort of through the process of messing around with this, I remembered reading about these things called Wardley Maps, created by Simon Wardley. And they have a couple of key features that just struck me as like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish here. They show relationship between things, so sort of like a magic quadrant with lines. But they also show change over time, sort of an evolution. So not only now, this point in time, but where you want things to go, where they've been. I thought, okay, well, this sounds exactly like what I want to do. So first, let me talk a little bit about maps, because that's what we're here to talk about. This is a map of my hometown, one point of view. This is another point of view of my hometown. I guess I should say town, because as you see, there's really not much there. Basically the same point of view as the previous one, so different scale, different symbols. It tells a different story. So You might use one, when you're returning from your trip around the moon, the other one when you're trying to navigate to target. So this is actually another map of my hometown. This one specifically is from showing the Third Battle of Winchester on September 19th, 1864. And it's these types of maps, these military battle maps, that were part of the inspiration for Simon Wardley in creating these new maps. So his sort of, his goal in creating a map, he wasn't trying to create a map, he was just basically trying to figure out how to understand strategy from the perspective of a CEO. Like, what's the industry doing? What should we be doing? And a lot of the stuff he had read, well, it didn't really answer any questions. It was mostly like just gut and intuition. And so he started, kind of being really introspective and looking for a solution. And he ended up picking up several different translations of Sun Tzu's Art of War. And one of the translations specified these 5 factors for victory, or 5 factors in governing competing opponents. So purpose, landscape, climate, doctrine, and leadership. And these really stood out for him because he was kind of looking at all the tools and realized, some got these 2 and some have 3, but nothing really was covering all of these, these factors that are going to help him succeed in beating other companies. All right, so another part of that, so he's reading this and he's reading these 5 factors and reads about the story of another Civil War battle, the Battle of Ball's Bluff. It's a pretty small battle. It's not many people know about it. It's actually within walking distance of where I grew up, so it's really interesting, and I'm really familiar with the landscape of Ball's Bluff, which, the story is early in the Civil War, I think 1861, the Union forces tried to cross the Potomac. They didn't know what they were doing. They crossed the Potomac and landed on the other shore of the Virginia side to a 300-foot bluff. The Confederate Army found them and assaulted them from high ground, and just unfortunately, the Union Army lost a lot, something like 7-1, I think. And then, sort of to make things worse, since they were just basically sitting on the banks of the river, the drowned soldiers were floating downstream to DC, and it was a pretty impactful sight, I think, for Abraham Lincoln at the time. So I think there was a lot of stuff going on, but the moral of the story is, these troops crossed into, hostile territory without understanding the landscape. So that really kind of drove home the need to have a way to describe the landscape of your system, your company, your architecture, or whatever. So as you can see, like, this is another part of the map, the Battle of Winchester, and it's got just insane amounts of detail, so much information and context. It's got topology, it's got the types of troops, like the commanders, their movements, their positions over time, the space between them. It shows impediments like wooden fences versus stone fences, roads. I mean, this is the type of thing, like, if you're trying to make a decision, this is a perfect map to have if you're, leading troops. So let me interject here with a quote Simon Wardley made about maps, and that's, remember that a map is just a model. It's a representation of reality. It's not supposed to be, exact. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to have some kind of purpose for a story that you're trying to tell. So that leads me to this. Let's start to look at a map, an example map, and break it down. On the vertical axis, there's a value chain, and this is showing some representation of well, I'll cover it in a second. I'm skipping ahead. The horizontal is the phase of evolution. And sort of the important part is you can see just in this sample map that there's a reference to time. So it's not just, again, like here's what the platform is now, but here's what it was in the past, applied some competition, and here's where we expect it to be in the future. So just a pretty simple looking map, and you can already determine quite a bit of information going on. All right, so let me break down the horizontal, the evolution, phases of evolution. Now they're not meant to be, it's not a measurement of like good or bad. It's literally just, this is a categorization of maturity. So nodes typically will move from left to right. And Genesis, the first sort of phase on the left, is usually where you'll find things that are new and unrefined and experimental. And items in this phase typically consume a lot of your time, and the output can be unpredictable. But an important thing to notice is Genesis is also where a lot of learning can happen because it's new and experimental. So it's also where we've typically done minimal investment, and maybe there's also like minimal expectation. So if it breaks, it's no big deal. But if it works, then you win. And then things move to the right as they mature. And then we end up on the far right. Things in the commodity phase are standardized. They support high volume. They are sort of the expected. And they're also where there's little room to improve, and there's also there's a lot more inertia for change. So once you get over into the commodities, say like your telephone, you're not going to change how telephones work. You just sort of pick up the telephone and expect it to work. So let me break down like maybe a practical example. So if you think about some Active Directory automation. At first, maybe you have a one-liner that you run ad hoc upon request. It does maybe one particular thing. You just do it whenever somebody says, hey, I need this done. And then you move along. So you mature it, you're moving towards custom, and now you've run the ad hoc process a bunch of times, and you've started to identify some of the common patterns. So maybe you build this into a module that, now you can do 100 requests at a time. But, it's still built within your organization. It's not supported or anything like that. So then the next phase, we're moving on to product. Maybe you start adding some automated tests and some documentation, and you open source this, and now you're pulling in contributions from the community. So it's no longer just about you and your custom work. It's something that's reusable, it's shareable, it's productized. Or maybe you just say, I'm going to buy something at this point. And then commodity, let's say you find some third party that will do it for you, and you outsource Active Directory management completely. You no longer even think about Active Directory management. It just happens, somebody joins your organization and they're magically populated. I guess that's what we're all looking for. But commodity would be like somebody's doing that for you, or it's so well-known and well-refined, you just don't think about it anymore. So these list of adjectives are just sort of guidelines. They'll all vary a little bit different, kind of based on what you're trying to map, and don't get too stuck on what they're describing. They're just a place to start. All right, so back to the vertical, the value chain. You'll see on the bottom it says invisible, on the top it's visible. And what that's describing is value as from the point of view of the customer. In this case, on the Wardley map, he calls it the anchor. This is what everything on the map is sort of referencing. This is the true north. It's where, where you start your discussion, and everything below this is less and less visible to the customer. So the further down you go, the more the customer has no idea it even exists. The closer you get to the customer, the more it's like, oh, this is the interface that they're using. So obviously, the further up they go, the customer's thinking, okay, this is really important to me. The further down they go, they don't care. So great things to put into commodities. They're not key differentiators. If you want, you could have multiple anchors. Say if we wanted to insert operations somewhere in here, you'd say obviously the customer's more valuable. They rely on some stuff. Operations provides that, and then here are the things below operations that they're expecting to, be available to them. And here's just a bunch of reference symbols. I pulled this from his documentation. I don't use all of them. They're just here for reference, but it's definitely a well thought out list. I've seen some maps that use all of these things like attitudes and methods, and you can get definitely very deep in the weeds and very expressive about these maps, so there's plenty of room. And I guess if you're into recursion, you could sort of do a map of maps, and so you could start off with a map that's very much in the genesis and minimally descriptive, and keep working on it until it's a commodity. All right, so here is my first attempt at a map. This was I was working on this just about the time that we were doing that quarterly planning session. And I used SOE operations, basically our team, as the anchor point. So everything on here is from our perspective. It's not, it's not a product roadmap of any kind. I'm not trying to investigate how this relates to a customer. So this is just, how do I deliver, a better product to the company? I was trying to finish this up in time for the quarterly review. I think I finished up the same week. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have gotten to where we were. But so we had 100 hours of work on our spreadsheet, and our product managers thinking, okay, well, obviously we can't do that, so we need to start cutting some stuff out. So one of the things she cut out, I think one of the very few things she cut out, was our project for configuration management. It was a big project. I think it was estimated at 20 days, so it would definitely get us within the threshold of our goal. She didn't have any context to sort of what the value of that was to our company, so it was just like, oh, this one's easy, we'll take this out, and we'll do it next quarter. And before building this map, I probably wouldn't have disagreed, because we had this just huge backlog of stuff. There was no set order. It was hard to define any kind of priority, what the dependencies were. I just know we had a whole bunch of work, and it seemed like we needed to get it done now. But I finished up this map, and we're looking at it, and we're like, configuration management is kind of important. It basically touches like half of the things we work on. So we go back, and we're like, look, we got to add configuration management. So we did. We prioritized it. We took some other stuff off of our list and moved along. And while I'm sort of making our project manager sound like the antagonist, that's not my goal. She's doing the best she can with the information she had. So this is sort of one of the reasons I started working on these. So this is the map I did most recently, sort of at the end of the quarter. And as you can see, in a couple months, we managed to move most of our stuff out of Genesis. Most of that was just implementing Puppet and getting it up and running. And then also we managed to throw in some Artifactory to just move our artifacts right into the product state. So I don't know if JFrog's in here, but they helped us out. So what this does is now that we've moved some of these experimental like unknowns shifted to the right, now we have some free time. So now we can start experimenting on new things. Because like I said, things in Genesis, they tend to be very time consuming. They're undocumented, they don't necessarily work. Maybe like one person knows how they work, so you have to go and find them and get them to explain it to you, or they're out sick or whatever. So we move things to the right, we're maturing. It gives us, again, that free cycles to experiment with new automation, new projects. So sort of the virtuous cycle I see is, you start at the beginning with an experiment. It's low cost, low risk. You figure out how to do it right, and then figure out how to make it scale. So this was, I was just following along a chat on Slack last week, actually, and Brendan Olin, AKA Dev Black Ops and the creator of PoshBot and several other awesome PowerShell utilities, made this comment about some project he had previously worked on. It's always a balancing act. I'm not going to read through it all for you, but I thought it was a perfect anecdote for the whole starting from the left, I guess, and moving to the right. So, we're making decisions. Do we invest our time in making this better? Do we buy a product that can do it better for us? And the thing I guess you need to keep in mind also, that scale is not literally equivalent. So going from Genesis to custom might be easy. Going from custom to product could be hundreds, thousands of hours of effort. So don't just assume like, yay, we got it out of Genesis and next week it'll be in product. So that's, you keep up these maps and you're having these discussions about, where do we go next? How are we going to get there? And maybe sometimes you should just buy stuff off the shelf. It's really just a discussion to have. And, another quote from Simon Wardley, never can be a perfect map, and that's okay. Reality can cope with uncertainty, and so can we. So you're not trying to get everything into one map. You're not trying to create the Google Earth, where you can zoom in infinitely, zoom out infinitely, drag around. You're really just trying to cover that point of view that helps you tell the story, helps you understand where you're going, maybe talk to your coworkers and figure out where they think you should be going. So I guess in summary, again, remind you, you're trying to communicate that context because we're not making these decisions in a vacuum, right? So get this down on virtual paper, share it, talk about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just the fact that you are trying to put these things in categories forces you to have these conversations about where you think things are. And that alone can really be enlightening. Remember to focus on a particular anchor. So don't just like I said, don't map everything. What are you trying to, whose point of view are you trying to express? And then don't go too deep. You're just trying to get as much information as you need to make a decision. If you feel like you have multiple stories you need to tell, go ahead and make more maps. That's fine. Have more discussions. Just you well, back in the days when we had like, multiple maps and you did have every map that you wanted in your pocket, it was pretty common to have multiple maps. So definitely do that. And then mine's not perfect. Don't worry about it being perfect. Just make a map and figure out where you're going. And just another tweet, because like he's insanely intelligent and very well spoken about these things. I'm talking about making maps from sort of an operational perspective, but he was thinking about them from like the perspective of a CEO. There are people that use these same tools to map out social programs in the UK and how feeding hungry people. So it's a way to just have a conversation and get a bunch of people who have a different experience or knowledge about a situation sort of focused into one place and one problem. Oh, also, I suggest not using Google Drawings to make these because it's really a pain in the butt. So if anybody finds like a really good drawing program that's, I don't know, cheap or free, let me know. So make these a whole lot easier to make. All right, so I think all the slides are going to get published, so you can go back to these later. But the very first one, I don't know what he's officially calling it, but the online book, basically Simon Wardley wrote these 18 chapters on sort of his history and the functional use of these in basically blog posts on Medium. So they're free, you can go out and read them at your leisure. There's a couple other blog posts that I found useful when I was trying to understand these. And then they also just had a conference over in the UK called MapConf or Map something. And just scrolling through that hashtag is really impressive. Like I said, there's a lot of different people using these to solve a lot of different problems. So I think they're on the verge of taking off in our space. And with that, I'm finished. Can I answer some questions? Cool. Did I thoroughly confuse everybody?
Does anyone have any questions?
Okay.
Nope,
If you'd like, I have some stickers up here. Come up, feel free to pilfer and walk away with some Stack Overflow swag. Thank you.